Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, everyone. Thank you for joining us for Road to COP30 Africa Speaks, Our Realities, Priorities, and Demands. On behalf of the Global Center in Nairobi, I warmly welcome you all joining us from across Africa and around the world. Before we begin, please note that this session is being recorded and will be available on our YouTube channel, Columbia Global Centers, Nairobi. As the discussion unfolds, we encourage you to post your questions in the Q&A section. Our panelists will address them towards the end. We invite you to take a brief survey at the end of the webinar. Your feedback will help us improve our future programs. And please note that the responses are confidential and will not affect your participation in the future with our global engagements. To stay informed about our upcoming programs, follow us on social media at Columbia Global Centers Nairobi on LinkedIn and cgc.nairobi on Instagram. Thank you once again for being part of today's session. It is now my pleasure to welcome our director, Dr. Murugi Ndirangu, to officially welcome you to today's event. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Sandra. Distinguished guests, it is a great privilege to be with you here today. As Sandra said, my name is Murugi Ndirangu, and I serve as the director of the Columbia Global Center here in Nairobi. CGC Nairobi, as it is popularly known, is one of Columbia Global's, is a part of Columbia Global, which is a university-wide initiative that leverages the remarkable scholarship, expertise, and resources of Columbia University to address the world's most complex challenges. The Nairobi Center facilitates research collaborations between Columbia and diverse stakeholders across Eastern and Southern Africa. And let me also say across Africa. We do work across Africa through strategic partnerships. Through strategic partnerships, we connect academic institutions, governments, and NGOs with Columbia's faculty and students to address pressing regional issues, including the climate change topic that we're going to look at today. But we also work in the areas of health, education, refugee and migration issues, as well as business and entrepreneurship, among others. It is through this network of partners and collaborators and the research expertise that we have at Columbia and also our academic institutions in the region that we continue to learn and add our voice to speak up about the harsh realities facing our world and the devastating challenges such as climate change, that specifically affect the African continent in grievous ways. We know that Africa is rapidly warming. Extreme weather events are exacerbating socioeconomic conditions, leading to increased displacement and hunger across the continent. The brutal irony is that Africa produces the least emissions globally, yet bears the most profound and most immediate costs. For too long, the international framework of the Conference of the Parties, or COP, has failed to hold highly industrialized nations accountable for core commitments on mitigation, adaptation, and finance. However, we must also look inward. Weak political will and limited policy ownership within the continent have often left many African governments reactive rather than forward-looking. As the world prepares for COP30, Africa has an urgent opportunity to reposition itself and assert its voice to the global stage, on the global stage, while also reflecting internally on its national commitment and local actions. The challenge before us is twofold: demanding what is owed to us as Africans and as people living on the continent, and delivering what is expected of us as responsible citizens. This is the urgent aim of our discussion today, which is one of a series that has been hosted and will be hosted by the various Columbia Global Centers. Ours is themed Road to COP30, Africa Speak. Our experts today will explore what meaningful action looks like, both from the global community and from within the continent, to ensure Africa's priorities are not just heard, but fully integrated into the outcome of COP30. I would here, at this point, like to welcome our moderator, Dr. Lisa Dale, who has kindly agreed to lead the discussion today. Professor Lisa Dale is a senior lecturer in climate and the director of the MA in Climate and Society program at Columbia University's Climate School. She's trained as a political scientist and studies how environmental policy can foster or hinder effective climate change adaptation at all scales. Her research areas include wildfires in the American West and resettlement policies in Rwanda. She teaches undergraduate and graduate level courses at the Columbia Climate School and is also a research fellow at the University of Rwanda. Let me at this juncture invite Lisa to lead the discussion as well as introduce today's speakers. Welcome, Lisa.
Thank you so much. Thank you for having me and inviting me here to participate in this exciting conversation. So I'm Dr. Lisa Dale. I'm a professor at Columbia University in New York City, so I'm quite far away from Africa, but I do spend a lot of time there as a researcher, and I teach classes there as well, mostly in Rwanda, as Marugi helpfully pointed out. I'm very happy to say, a member of the Faculty Advisory Committee for the Columbia Global Center in Nairobi, and that's maybe my most important connection here to this panel. So I really look forward to hearing from our panelists. I've attended 5 COPs in my career, so I have some experience with COP and some thoughts about what to expect this year, although I won't be attending this year. So I'll be really interested to sort of explore what we know about COP, what we might expect from COP this year, and where Africa fits in particular. What are the particular opportunities and maybe risks that African countries face as they head to Brazil? So let's get started. I'd like to invite each panelist now to very briefly just introduce themselves, tell us a little bit about your own expertise, your experience with COP, and what it is that you will bring to this panel. So Dr. Sheila Obim, can we begin with you?
Hello. Thank you so much. I'm thrilled to be on this panel. I think this is the second time on a Columbia panel. The last time I had the privilege of actually speaking in Columbia University because I wanted to feel the energy of the university, which is unique and extraordinary. So thank you so much. So my name is Sheila Obim, and I'm the Executive Director of Alliance for Science. Alliance for Science is a science communication advocacy organization. We're 10 years old. We were started at Cornell University, featuring and focusing on advocacy around agricultural biotechnologies. But now we expanded our mandate, and we speak very much about how biotechnology specifically, but other technologies can support countries in the global south on challenges of food, health, environment. And now we are really looking at energy poverty, because without energy development, there will be no development. So we have 4 pillars now that we focus on in our advocacy work. As for me, I trained as a scientist. I am old enough to say I was there when COP began. I had just finished my PhD, and but the first COP that I paid attention to was COP3, Kyoto, because that was so exciting. It was the first time we as the human race realized that we were damaging the planet. Like, it's our fault, that this thing, climate change, is real and it's our fault. And that was a hard-won conclusion by scientists. People died fighting for that against the fossil fuels lobby, who had known this for a long time, but had kept the science away from the public. So when that came out, I was, as a biochemist, I trained as a medical biochemist and a plant biochemist, and I was a research fellow in Oxford. And I thought I would spend my life as a bench scientist, but I couldn't help but be so moved by this intersection of science and policy. And of course, my continent, Africa. So even though I was in Oxford, I was listening to journalists like Callistus Juma, who was publishing then. There was no internet and all this. So he would publish on Earth bulletins about Africa's position. And that was the only perspective we had of what it was. And I would be there doing my experiments and understanding what the bigger meaning was somewhere in my home continent. Little did I know that 25 years or more later, I would be so immersed in it. So I've been to about 5 or 6 COPs. As Alliance for Science, we have a partnership with UNEP. We support them on advocacy around their environmental governance. So in their road to COP, we support them in the communications work, some events. AMCEN will be there at UNEA, UN Environment Assembly. And so we do all that work. And so what I'll be bringing to this conversation is an understanding of how Africa's voice has evolved in speaking about its challenges, understanding it and self-advocating for it. And that is where we as Alliance for Science support, and specifically looking at the science-based decisions that are needed. And the understanding is needed for the negotiators to lobby for a better future. Thank you very much.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Dr. Obim. Super interesting. Can't wait to learn more. Leah Adhiambo, can we turn to you? Could you please introduce yourself?
Thank you so much, and hello, everybody. This is my second webinar with Colombia, and I'm so glad, especially from the last one that was so successful, and I'm hoping that this one is also going to be very successful. So let me start by what I'll be bringing today, and I'll be speaking from the agricultural side of climate change. So generally, Leah is a founder of Ladell Agritech Limited, an enterprise dedicated to transforming African agriculture through innovation, sustainability, and climate resilience. With a strong background in agribusiness and climate action, I combine strategic leadership and hands-on experience to deliver scalable solutions for farmers and communities. Notably, I'm a member of the Nairobi County Climate Action. This is now my 5th year. I'm actively contributing to shaping policies aligned with the Paris Agreement and the UN Sustainable Development Goals, and my leadership. Ladell Agritech, under my leadership still, has pioneered initiatives that expand market access for smallholder farmers, enhance food security, and promote adoption of climate practices. These efforts directly advance majorly to zero hunger management. My achievements include coordinating multi-stakeholder agricultural projects, driving partnerships that reduce post-harvest losses, and championing financial inclusion for farmers by integrating agri-tech solutions and sustainable farming models. I have positioned my company as a forward-looking enterprise committed to resilience, profitability, and entrepreneurial stewardship. My passion lies in demonstrating that agriculture can both commercially be viable and environmentally restorative, ensuring a thriving future for farmers, partners, and investors alike. So thank you, and I'm looking forward to learn from my panelists too, and to engage more with everybody, especially as we had a voice for Africa in the COP30. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much. What a wonderful introduction. Certainly agriculture will be central to the conversation about Africa at COP. So we look forward to learning more from you. Can we turn to Collins Otieno now, please, for an introduction?
Thank you, Prof. I hope you can hear me. Sorry, I'm not on camera because my bandwidth is a bit of an issue, but I think I just go for it. Probably starting would be to introduce where I work. I work with HIVOS. HIVOS is an international development organization that is more founded by humanist values. we are a Dutch strive for the goals of just inclusive and sustainable societies. I support HIVOS in the climate finance stream. Of course, I will get to that sometime later. Basically, what we do in the climate finance stream is to be able to, number one, design and pilot some of the instruments or mechanisms, climate finance that is more responsive to communities, work with different governments, especially within 7 countries that I support, that is Kenya, Bolivia, Tunisia's climate finance instruments that can be. Collins is, I would say, as a climate finance development policy practitioner within the space of sustainability, environmental conservation. I would say that with a strong background on environmental planning and management, as well as, of course, climate finance. Within this particular conversation, what I'll be bringing on would be mostly the component on climate finance, and especially climate finance that streams to the local. This is something that we've been able to model, especially financial instruments like Next Level Grant Facility that supports local communities directly, limiting or rather reducing the sort of, I would call, the challenges of access, the challenges of climate finance quality, and that probably will come to play, especially when we come in. Thank you so much for the opportunity, and I'm looking forward to the conversation and learning from fellow panelists. Thank you.
Wonderful. Thanks so much. Climate finance front and center at this year's COP, as always. So we will certainly dive deeper into that topic as well. And last but certainly not least, we look forward to an introduction from Dr. Godwin Opinde.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Lisa. I hope you can get me. My name is Godwin, as said. I'm a lecturer at Kenyatta University in the Department of Spatial and Environmental Planning. I think this is my second webinar with Colombia. Attachment to Colombia in form of research and exchanges that we do with faculty from Columbia University. Apart from that, I chair ECI, Environmental Compliance Institute, an NGO that is involved in issues of climate change, issues of environmental governance, and is really key in leadership on issues of air quality and the rest. It'll be my pleasure to be in this panel. And I'll have, and I hope we're going to have a very interesting time throughout our discussions today. Thank you very much, Lisa.
Thank you, and welcome to everybody. What a wonderful panel with so many different and diverse, I think, areas of expertise. So let's get right into it. So I guess we need to start by thinking about what the challenges are, the climate-related challenges that Africa is facing most directly and most urgently. And those challenges, as I think Marugi indicated when she began, are a little bit different and particular compared to the rest of the world. So let's start there. What challenges do Africa face in particular? What's the most challenging climate issues facing Africa? And how well do you think those issues will be represented at COP this year in Belém? Who wants to tackle that question? Can we start with you, Dr. Obim, again? And then I'll start mixing it up, and we won't make you go first every time.
Oh, wow. I mean, sorry, the challenges haven't changed. The challenges are still a challenge to adapt to the rapidly changing climate. So we've moved from people not believing that it is climate. I don't know how to switch off my phone connector. I'm not sure if you can hear that. I've switched off my phone, but it still comes on my laptop. But yes, so we do still have recurring droughts. We have floods. We have extreme weather conditions, but it's the variability and inability of our farmers to plan from season to season. In Kenya, we've seen how that has caused famine from the droughts, from the floods. And we've had biblical challenges in the East Africa region, even, you know, with the pests, the swarms of pests recently. So the challenges are visceral, they are real, they are recurring, and they are affecting farmers day to day in their ability to make decisions about when to plant, how to plant, etc. And crops which used to grow well and used to yield well are no longer yielding to the level that they used to, because it's difficult for farmers to adapt as fast as they can. So overall, our challenge is, how are we as a continent going to adapt to the rapidly changing condition? How are we going to, apart from adapting, how are we going to deal with the loss and damage that has already recurred? And how can we begin to recover in order to build resilience? But of course, this year, the real top of the agenda challenge is, how can we get a fair deal in terms of finance? It took a long time to put a number to the challenge, and Africa did. And the world agreed. $100 billion is what was going to come. And at that time, it was going to come by 2020. It didn't. The 100 billion fund that was going to help us adapt didn't materialize. It was a number put in paper. Then, of course, the goalpost shifted again. And they said, okay, 100 billion a year. And now the African countries, with others in the global south, China and some of the BRICS, have said, actually, doing a fair assessment, which we can do now based on actuals, it is way beyond that. It is 1.2 or 3 trillion. That's really what it will cost for Africa to adapt. And these figures seem astronomical and impossible, but they're not impossible when you look at the money that is in the system in terms of where the funds could come from. So we do believe that Africa can get a fair deal, and this is the COP where the new collective quantified goal on climate finance is going to be negotiated and hopefully agreed. This new goal with clear numbers and trackable and hopefully accessible funds. So those are our challenges as I see it in the broad terms. Thank you.
Wonderful landscape setting. Thank you so much. Let's turn to Collins Otiendo, since we're speaking specifically about climate finance and how front and central that will be at the COP. Mr. Otiendo, I'd be interested in your thoughts on this and how you're envisioning climate finance at this year's COP. What are the main things we face?
Thank you, Prof. So I think at a crossroad, if you ask me, has just experienced one of the worst and the longest droughts ever witnessed. Zambia, I think I was in Zambia like 3-4 months ago, and you could tell the impact of that particular drought. Up north, if you look at Kenya specifically, up north, we are living the real aspects of climate change as far as the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change report, Assessment Report 6, is concerned. We are actually at the limits of adaptation. What I mean by this is just complementing what Dr. Sheila says, that the limits to adaptation, that is loss and damage, is living with the African communities currently. I work with local farmers up north in Kenya, and one of the things that pastoralists know how to do is to keep records of how many goats, how many sheep, how many camels they have. You will be surprised that between 1994 and now, a pastoralist in Marsabit County has lost camels, sheep, and goats equivalent to almost 900,000 Kenya shillings. I mean, that is not quantified as far as climate finance is concerned. We talk absolute figures that is more general, yet climate impacts our, I would say, household economies greatly. So basically, as far as climate change is concerned and the impact of climate change is concerned, I think Africa is living that element as we speak currently. Moving very quickly in terms of climate change impacts on the economies, I think it's more pronounced currently than any other time. Every single change in temperature is ideally translating to changes within the economy. It can either be within the agriculture sector, it can either be within the transport sector, like in South Africa, I think experiencing some of the worst impacts as far as transport sector is concerned. I think the trains sector. So I think it's gradually coming to unveil itself that the impact of climate change as far as economies are concerned, it's aggressively impacting on different people and communities. Let me move into climate finance specifically and to what Dr. Sheila was mentioning, that I think COP29, let me go back to COP29, which was setting the new collective quantified goal on finance and having a mobilization goal. And I'm very keen to call it mobilization goal because it's the 300 billion goal that is set for. In fact, the terminology or the language of within that is developed countries who lead mobilization is sort of very weak to the extent that you cannot pinpoint whom to sort of give that sort of role to be able to lead mobilization. So that is one side. On the other side, we have a 1.3 trillion goal, which is, I would say, also mobilization goal based on science, but not committed to. And that is the final section that needs to be dealt with at this particular time at COP30. And Dr. Sheila, I think, has mentioned that. Now moving to really delve into the challenges and seeing the realities of climate change impact, be it within the households, be it within economies, whichever sector we are talking about, the global community is shifting from the normal public streams of finance provision and shifting a bit of role to the private sector and saying, look here, we have $1.3 trillion dollar goal that we need to provide as far as climate finance is concerned. What do we do? Of course, that is the narrative that they are saying. So they are saying, let the private sector lead the way. And that has a repercussion, especially for. So then you kind of ask yourself whether whatever challenges that Africa is facing currently, or whatever challenge the global South is facing, would be matched quality or quantity with this particular $1.3 trillion dollar goals. So I want to stop at that because probably can move a little bit much into the goals. But the idea is just to probably be able to pronounce, especially at the onset, that Africa is not just reading and consuming the content of the IPCC 6th assessment report. Africa is actually living that reality. We are at the tipping point where we have reached at the point where we are at adaptation limits. We are slowly seeing losses and damages caused by climate catastrophes in all the sectors that you may, of course, look at. Thank you.
Thank you so much. And those are all really key and important points. I like the term mobilization goal. I think that's a helpful way of thinking about the collective quantified goal. We'll probably come back to that as well. I'd like to turn now to Leah Adhiambo because so much of what has already been said relates to agriculture, and some of the losses and damages across Africa that are the most obvious and most pronounced are in the agricultural sector. So I would love to hear from this panelist about what you see as the most pressing risks facing Africa from climate change and how you expect those to play out at the COP this year.
Thank you so much, Dr. Lisa. I think Collins and the other and Dr. You'll just forgive me for the name. I'll remember it next time. But generally, you've talked about the challenges and pretty well you've summarized it, almost all. And the major challenge that comes up is the agricultural sector that leads to the health issues that come up. So you find that at the end of the day, climate change is not only an environmental challenge, it becomes now a human challenge. Like, it leads to so many things that we don't see, especially. So one of the things that really stands out is We need, like Africa, as we're going to stand out and speak for ourselves, especially at the COP30 this year. We've had like several of them. We've talked about climate change. It's an issue that every other person knows, but so far we are looking like victims. So that's a mindset that looks like that's something that I just feel like for 2025, it's something that should really be very gone. As we are speaking right now and moving forward, we are supposed to get from the victim mindset to being very assertive and proactive to the solutions that are really going to help us. That is number one. And it's not an African issue. We are not supposed to be victims ourselves, and we are not supposed to be viewed as victims too. That alone will erase any other challenges that come in the middle of us getting any solutions that we've always wanted to get. Because as we speak right now, with all the panelists that we have right now, we have solutions. It's not like we don't have, and it's not like only us that have the solutions. Solutions are spread all over, as in every other sector that is involved. So number one, we are going to talk about, especially the way Collins is saying, climate finance. That's the major hindrance. One is because if you look at the statistics, Africa is the least contributor to the world's climate change. But you look at it, we are the ones that get the most impact. So you find like we contribute least, but we have like the worst impacts of whatever we don't even contribute to. We contribute like 5%. So the other 95% of the countries that are contributing to this are, let's say, more resourceful, more financially capable than us, but we are getting the impact hugely, especially you see now the way Collins is talking about farmers are losing livestock, agriculture, especially food. Let's just talk about maybe the crop production. I am in that field. We have innovations like my company deals majorly in innovations that are driving agriculture to the next thing. We are using less water through hydroponics technology, through aquaponics. We have all that it takes. But what happens is Dr. Ndirago can be a witness to me. I've been being in touch with her. And the major thing that is hindering us is the finances. So another thing that we need to really be assertive on is, why is it that we are not in the forefront of getting grants, leave alone loans? Why are we not getting grants for financing the solutions that we have? So for once and for all, climate change starts not being more of something we continue talking about, which we are very, very aware of, but something that we are like, today we are at this point. How much are we moving backwards towards eradicating every other challenge that is coming towards us? So I wouldn't want to really talk much. Let's talk more in the next questions that are coming. So thank you so much.
Thank you so much. Such interesting points here. We have one more panelist to hear those initial thoughts about what the biggest risks are facing Africa and how you imagine those issues playing out at the COP. And so we'd love to hear from Dr. Godwin Opinde on that question.
Thank you very much, Lisa. And I think Sheila, Collins, and I have pretty covered much of the ground. Maybe what I'll spotlight on is on there's a linkage between the impacts that, I mean, the impacts of the droughts, floods, which are caused by the climate, and the linkage to mental health. So it is not only in terms of the biophysical, but also our social is affected, our health, well-being is affected, and so it has the economic aspect is also there. Having said that, one thing that I'd wish to delve into is the skewed nature of the financial architecture of the whole thing that we call climate financing. It's for me, I think it's a very nice word, but for it to make meaning, it is the whole architecture. How is it been designed so that it becomes effective? Leah has pointed out the issue of the fact that issues of equity coming in and issues of climate justice, polluting less and having more of this impact. So we need some financing for this, but the financing is coming in terms of loan and not grant. So you're making me more vulnerable from that extent. But also, as we look at that, we should also, as Africa now, have a mental shift so that we take leadership in matters climate because it's affecting us. Climate financing is affecting us, so that we lead from the front and we try to pull up the resources that we have to try to address what we can, as much as we are fighting for equity. Because what's likely to happen is what Claire says, we might end up being always ending up with the shorter end of the stick and also being looked as a victim, crybaby, but we can also offer indigenous solutions that are coming from within. So as we move to COP30, I think the mental shift should be, we lead, we have some sense of ownership on this thing that's affecting us, and to what extent can we chip in our financial architecture. I think we'll discuss more as we go. Thank you. Thank you, Lisa.
Thank you so much. Such interesting comments. So we've heard I think all of these comments kind of fit together really nicely. And we've heard some fairly dire language from these panelists, biblical challenges and the limits of adaptation, and quite a lot of concern about the impacts of climate change. But we've also heard, I think, a lot of hope and opportunity and talk of mindset change and innovation and opportunity. So I want to dig a little deeper into what's going to happen at COP. And what does leadership, we heard a little bit of this from Mr. Opinde just minutes ago. I'm curious your thoughts about leadership at COP. What does that look like? Who is doing that kind of leadership? Who do you expect it to really shine at COP this year? And what is their message? How is Africa representing itself in a leadership way at COP? And what are those messages and how can we move that forward? Leah Diambo, can we begin with you? Do you have some thoughts on this?
Okay. Thank you, Lisa, for getting back to me. So let's talk about the leadership of climate leadership. So generally, according to me, leaving alone the major players in these in climate leadership, I would really major in the grassroots. So talk about communities, talk about cities, talk about the grassroots level, because most of the actions are taken at the grassroots level. Most of them don't even get to maybe to the national leadership. And you find that the national leadership is, maybe let's talk about it at the forefront. Maybe the African Union, they are at the forefront of all these. But I'm measuring at the grassroots level because these are the people that do the actions. So it means advancing adaptation innovations, climate smart agriculture, renewable energy, nature-based solutions. These build resilience in ways that scale regionally. That's something that we should, according to me, leadership really comes down to the grassroots levels. And as we are like presenting ourselves or positioning ourselves, it means that the local actors should be really very essential to these leaderships. Like, let's say, for example, let's say the major players, like, let me talk about the national leaders. There should be a structure that comes down to the grassroots levels, that these the community-based let's say the community-based groups, they are community-based groups, they are climate active groups. There are so many organizations, there are NGOs, there are so many people. We can have like a partnership that comes across that cuts across these let's say this chain of leaders involved in this whole process, so that it gets to the point where the action starts. And I believe so much that the action starts at the grassroots level. So it's in a situation where, let's say, for example, me as a company, having all the innovations and every other solutions that can help maybe the agricultural sector, linking up with somebody who is majorly, especially an NGO or a group, let's say like an institution like where Polly is coming from, we can be linking up this chain together, build a strong unity towards, because at the end of the day, one person has a better advantage than the other. So we can actually downstream these advantages from one person to the other by linking up, connecting a chain where all of us share these solutions. We share how best can we get and really be proactive about every other thing that we want to do in terms of climate change. And then at the end of the day, that's where it really starts, rather than having only one organization. Because right now we are talking about COP30. There's so many people that don't even know COP30 exists. And then there is the African Union. The heads of state meet every other time talking about climate change. We are never aware of what they talk about. The only thing we are aware right now, let's say in Kenya, is our president saying that by 2030, we are supposed to have 5 billion trees planted. So, and as we are here, we are all knowledgeable, and we know that it's not only about planting 5 billion trees by 2030. It's a lot that is in it that can actually help plant 5 billion trees by 2030. And by all these solutions steered together, and we are all giving them maybe a target of 2030, we shall be somewhere. You see, something like that. So mine is more of identifying who every other person, not even saying that now let's say like now Leah is the CEO of Ladell Agritech. So she is in the agricultural field. So let's leave it to her. So we can link up the way we've done here, and this is a very let's thumbs up to Columbia University, because you brought Collins, you brought Leah, you brought Sheila together. We're sharing these things, and I hope that when we come out of here, we are like linking up, having partnerships, share your solution, so that we see that we don't leave it as solutions. We steer it forward to proactiveness, and what are we getting out of these in the next solution, in the next let's say in the coming ways, so that, as I said before, climate change no longer becomes what we talk about, what we victimize ourselves about, but something we are moving towards eradicating just once and for all. Thank you so much.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. I'd love to turn now to Collins Otieno, who said in his last remarks that he thought we were really at a crossroads. And so I would love to invite him to expand on that thought as it relates to this question we're now wrestling with, which is, what does leadership look like at COP this year? How do we enter that crossroads and come out ahead? How does Africa best demonstrate leadership in the midst of this crossroads? Collins Otieno, we welcome your thoughts.
Thank you, Prof. I think let me start by laying in some bit of foundation in this case by going on to what is the business as usual. The business as usual has been that we have different negotiating blocks sort of interacting with one another. Unfortunately or fortunately, I support the Kenyan negotiation stream on climate finance. So we have different negotiating blocks sort of interacting and interfacing with one another. And if things don't span out the way you want it to span out, probably you have a turnaround and you push a bit of fire from the civil society organizations and indigenous people organizations present at the Conference of Parties to be able to make some bit of noise so that you have certain agenda items brought back or sort of agreed on ultimately. A good example, of course, is the aspect of the position around loss and damage finance. That is a business as usual, or rather, you probably have politicians sort of being engaged to be able to come up with a position, business as usual. But I think moving forward, there must be somewhat a practice that sort of depicts business unusual. And business unusual is what Leah was sort of describing. Leah was describing a situation where we, the power, the process, steering the process from the point of this is the evidence as far as climate change is concerned or climate crisis is concerned within the villages, within the communities that we live in. This is what we are experiencing. I know for a fact, especially having some interaction, especially with my work stream in Brazil, that the indigenous people, for instance, are organizing themselves in a way to be able to demand specific things around COP30. But that's not enough because we've also seen a point where certain organizations or certain sort of groups contradict each other as far as messaging is concerned. Business unusual. Let me now what should actually happen. Would the African people, for instance, sit down, have a solid position that they use to first influence their political class, because political class plays a lot, especially in negotiations. Anything that is not resolved would go to a political decision, unless otherwise Rule 16 apply, where you are sort of told that, okay, this is deferred to other sort of a process where decision would be made. So for me, it would be African civil society, African academia, African different sectors, the private sector, whichever it is. We already know that there are, let me say, two main sort of groupings within the African space, and they speak authoritatively for, or let me say three or four, or let me say three, authoritatively for the African continent. So number one, the Committee of Heads of States is the COASOC, the Committee of Heads of States. I think it's chaired by the Kenyan president. It's a leadership structure on itself, and sort of speaks very authoritatively as far as matters climate change is concerned, and if regional or African position is needed from heads of states for that matter. Then we have the Africa Group of Negotiators, who speak very authoritatively as far as negotiations are concerned within the negotiation rooms. But we also have, of course, the small island states, or the LDCs, if I may call it so, the least developed countries that also have a bloc, and they form the majority of the African countries, about 33 countries. And I think it's high time that we sort of sit down, especially as Leah was mentioning, have very credible evidence that is grounded on community realities, and start engaging, because unfortunately, as COP is designed, it's not a place where local communities get to interact with the content that much. They get to interact with the content to the extreme that they're allowed to. And by that, I am saying that very cautiously, because for a given fact is that certain negotiation streams are closed or open for civil society or for individuals, and only open for governments. And you have a pink badge, you can be able to go in. If you don't have, you cannot be able to. Yes, we do have a way of packaging. We translate that evidence into different negotiations to crack it from that point. Because I have seen, especially this workout within Glasgow. I saw that workout, especially when adaptation was almost being thrown out, and we had a formation of the Glasgow Sharm el-Sheikh sort of work program to handle adaptation. I've seen this work with the Loss and Damage Fund, and it's something that I think we resort to it in the latter stages. We don't bring it in the prior stages as a strategy. Unfortunately, we resort to it when we are told no. So I think that kind of I would call it pivoting is needed to ensure that we deliver at the tail end. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Great comments, super interesting. We're going to turn now to Dr. Sheila Obeem for her thoughts on leadership and what Africa can bring to the COP. But let me make a very quick side comment to members of our audience. Please share your questions with us in the Q&A, because we're getting ready to turn to audience questions. Would love to hear what's coming up in your mind, what you want to hear more about. So please populate the Q&A. Dr. Obeem, to you, thoughts about leadership.
Thank you. This is the aspect that I'm most passionate about, because we are we do support UNEP in its journey from the beginning of the year, from CAHOSC, where the Committee of the Heads of State meet. That's when they've been brought to, they come, they ask what happened in the last COP, and then the ministers brief them, and then they set the high-level agenda in terms of Africa as a continent. I'm very proud that Africa is doing this now. As I said, I've been around long enough to see when it was all disjointed and we were torn apart as 54 countries because we didn't have a cohesive voice, and we have varying capacities, lots of tiny countries, some big countries. But CAHOSC now is very well coordinated and has been for the last 30, 40 years. And then when that process starts in February at the AU, they set the priorities for the continent and they put the key messages and they say, this is what we're negotiating as a continent. They try to get all the continent's priorities on there. And then it moves on. So this is, I'm just following on with what was just said. It then follows on the handover to the ministers. And there you have the African Ministerial Conference on Environment, AMCEN, then meets. Every country has a climate envoy. And that climate envoy is a cabinet-led position, so because it's so important. And so this year, AMCEN is then, the AMCEN presidency is being led by Egypt. And then they coordinate the Africa group of negotiators that have the lead negotiators. And these lead negotiators are cabinet level positions. They're very powerful. And this year, Tanzania has a team of about 40 people, and they coordinate all the technical expertise around the continent so that when the negotiation happens, some countries, like a small country like Lesotho, you may not have the expertise in finance, whatever. You get it from South Africa. You may not have the agricultural knowledge. You get it from Ethiopia. Kenya leads on the tech. It gives everybody the expertise. So that way, all our experts, we're able to go into the negotiation with the technical capacity supported by UNEP that we need. But an important point was made, and that is the process. How do we get power back from the process? How do we move from the business as usual? Because the business as usual doesn't seem to be giving us what we want. There is a wonderful process we're very proud of that is cascading and it's coordinated, etc. But when it doesn't work for us, then we call in the communities and say, what is your reality? And then we begin to look, as Leah said, we begin to look like we're begging, we're crying, baby, we're all dying. Because now we're in a desperate position of trying to reverse a no into a yes in the last few days of COP. So I feel that one of the things we haven't done well is to have a parallel process that is as robust as the political process that goes from CAHOSC to COP. The road to COP for the continent in terms of the political processes that shape the priorities are clear. They meet CAHOSC, AMCEN, AGCN, Bonn, etc. Then they end up at COP. Now, the civil society have a hodgepodge of meetings everywhere, and then they come here and there, and then they're dragged here and there, but we don't have a coordinated, and why not? We are, as a body of voices, as many as the countries, if not more. Why don't we have a process that is a road to COP, that is a civil society road, not just that the major groups come in when the UN invites them and gives them badges to be observers. We go in as observers in many of the COP processes, but we should have our own parallel processes so that they can easily feed in and out and not just be brought in and dragged in willy-nilly at the end of it. And I think that is where we should be thinking of getting to. I'm more hopeful now with what we're seeing with South Africa, with the G20 presidency, and how they're beginning to be emboldened to say, you know what, the world is losing interest in us. Nobody cares about our priorities. There's not enough money, so they say, for us. But we're still going to ask for more money. We're going to ask for the money we need, and we're going to find it from somewhere. I feel that there is courage and some coherence, and the grassroots need to come together. So I had three sort of messages in terms of leadership. We've talked about the first one, a fair share of climate funds. Yes, we need that. But we need a just share of global voice. Our voices are often just noise. They're not coordinated enough and they're not amplified enough. And thirdly, we need a future that we can define by agency, not aid. We have solutions, as Leah has said. There's so many. We're not lacking of solutions. We are lacking of catalysts catalytic enabling environments for those solutions to work. But we've come, first of all, we wouldn't have survived this long if we didn't have solutions. We're a very resilient continent. So, and indigenous communities particularly have extraordinary solutions that we need to scale up, amplify, and ratify. So I'll end there. Thank you.
What an inspiring call to action. So many very specific ideas, really rooted in the science and the reality and envisioning a different type of future. So thanks for that, Dr. Obim. Lastly, but certainly not least, we really welcome the thoughts of Godwin Opinde on leadership and what that might look like at COP. I know that in your last comments, I think you said something really provocative and important, which was that finance, when it comes in the form of loans, actually increases vulnerability. It's intended, or we imagine the flow of finance to reduce vulnerability, but I think you quite rightly point out that sometimes the provision of finance can actually undermine that goal and increase vulnerability. So how do we tackle these complicated issues as leaders? How do African leaders seek better outcomes at COP? What are your thoughts on this?
Thank you, Lisa. I think Leah, Collins, and Sheila have done justice to the question. The angle that I just want to pick is the positive bit, that leadership is now being seen in terms of even messaging that is being provided at the top level. And we are looking at Africa presenting itself as that part of the world that has solutions, looking at areas of renewable energy and the potential that they have, some of the nature-based solutions that are in place, and trying to look at then how can we have finances that are not making us more vulnerable, as you said, to be able to provide this as an enabler. What I would say is, and resonate very well with other speakers, is that as much as we have the messaging that is coming up from the top leadership, there must be some coherence, especially between the civil society and also the mainstream government, who are actually mostly involved in the negotiation. So from where I sit, I tend to see from an optimistic angle that the road to COP 2030 from African perspective, there is some leadership in terms of messaging. What is it that we really want? And how do we want it? How are we positioning ourselves? That is, I think there's some element of clarity. I know we need to improve on that. But as Sheila had said, much better than before. And maybe I'd stop there for now. And concerning issues of vulnerability and financing, maybe just to a little bit on that, is that we might end up being aid dependent. I would want to give an example of the research that we are carrying at Turkana, which has been receiving several aids because it's an area that is looked as a marginalized area, and the drought effect is much severe, and it has all sorts of problems also linked to climate change. But you look over time, as much as we talked of the financial architecture from the global level, what about at local level? Does the finances translate to meaningful outcomes? Or we lose the finances along the way in the whole kind of management issues and not actually tackling the actions. So as much as we are looking at the global perspective, I also want us to look at the local perspective. At the local level, how are we managing even the little that we are getting as the finances? Thank you.
Thank you so much. Really interesting ground setting. And I want to turn now to the questions from the audience. We have two really good questions. We'll start with the first one, and I'll sort of open this up to the panelists. If this is a topic you want to tackle, please indicate so, raise your hand, and we'd love to hear from you. So here's the first question. This audience member is pointing to similarities between Brazil and Africa, saying they face similar issues regarding financing and also legal protection. Some comments here about the rule of law. And then here's the question that I think we can tackle. Are there examples of legal protection for local or smallholder farmers in parts of Africa, especially related to women's protection regarding small producer chains, that are also contributing to the leverage of sustainable development? In other words, how are we seeing these issues play out in Africa? And I think this question writer is coming from the Brazil side, where they're sort of wrestling with very similar questions. How can we, so this questioner says, in Brazil, we have some legal protections that valorize women's work, the pension system, and law. Are there other examples in Africa that provide this kind of legal protection for women's work as smallholder farmers? And how can we think about that in a sustainable development lens? Does anyone want to take a crack at this question?
I love that question because for the last few years, we have some LATAM fellows. So Alliance for Science is a global science communication organization. So we have some fellows that work in the LATAM area, specifically Argentina, a little bit in Brazil, but we also were negotiators in the CBD COP on the technology track, because we were with groups around biotech. And there we loved our collaboration with LATAM partners. We learned so much, and we have fostered formal agreements to to grow our South-South collaboration. So all of these examples that he said are wonderful about the legal protections for women's work. Sadly, I cannot find similarities in Africa to that extent. But it's also to understand from our LATAM brothers and sisters that it's possible. It is possible to help women smallholder farmers be more resilient. It is possible, it is doable, and it does make a change. So much of what we've been doing is bringing together, and it's lessons sharing and learning from each other. We will do more of that going forward. I do know, though, from recent interactions that we're beginning to see more inclusive financial products around climate insurance and agricultural insurance, that within that create products that help women and help communities. I know that Vision Fund and World Vision have a very wonderful one that is a recovery one for communities that have come under a flood or something like that. And they tend to particularly target women smallholder farmers. But so those examples are few and far between, very new, and need to be scaled up. And there's just more need for partnerships and South-South collaboration and learning and sharing. Thank you.
Wonderful, thank you. Any of the other panelists want to weigh in on this question of legal protections for smallholder female farmers?
As a farmer myself,
hoping you would. Yes, this is who we need to hear.
Okay, as a farmer myself, I don't think there are any legal regulations towards the smallholder farmers, especially if it's on women. I don't think the agricultural industry has really dealt so much into that. It hasn't put so much policies and measures in place to a point where it now gets to gender equality or something like that. Because let me speak about the Kenyan agricultural industry. So far, nothing. I can't say that women are really protected, but as youth and women-led organizations, we take it upon ourselves before it goes to the national government. We take it upon ourselves to do a protective measures, to put in place protective measures, especially to the women, and that is when it comes to the women farmers and the women employees. But that is more of just us protecting ourselves, but it is nowhere in any legal policy or legal roles. So far, we don't have those similarities with Brazil. We are still open to that. And as Sheila has said, we are hoping for more opportunities to come in so that we can get to a space like that.
Thanks so much. This really resonates with me too. My experience as COP have always reinforced to me that sort of peer-to-peer learning and country-to-country learning is maybe one of the most meaningful outcomes of the COP. And in my experience, it happens entirely outside of the negotiating rooms. And so I really appreciate hearing these kinds of conversations. We're planting seeds, we're beginning conversations, we're learning from each other already, and it hasn't even begun. So that's wonderful. Let me turn to the next question from the audience. This is a question that keeps coming up, I think, for countries everywhere, which is that COP30 is going to take place in the rainforest, in the Amazon rainforest, one of the most important ecosystems on planet Earth and maybe one of the most threatened areas as well. And how we think about that, I think, is really central to how this COP will be experienced. So this listener asks, how important is the issue of tropical forest preservation in Africa's agenda in Belém? Anybody want to speak to that question?
It is important in that they are stipulated in our nationally determined contributions and in our national adaptation plans. So mapping your tree cover, every country knows their tree cover and has targets and understands the fragility of different ecosystems. So in terms of mapping and the science and what it takes, the data is quite robust and there's quite a lot being done to try to preserve that and our wetlands. So there are many of our continent-wide policy frameworks that are looking at preserving and protecting our rainforest. I come from Nigeria and I come from the largest remaining tropical rainforest community. So we're a forest-dependent community in Cross River State. And it's lush and it's dense and it is being eroded because of urbanization and infrastructure and all of that. But it is difficult for even national government to do that much in a lot of this because of the way the policies are. They're devolved according to states. So like even in Kenya, agriculture is devolved to your county. So you can find, depending on what the leadership is in that locality, can completely turn around the agenda for a forest-dependent community. So even the nationally determined contributions and the national policy can sometimes be wiped out by the local because of the devolution of that. So that is a problem. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you so much. Any other panelists want to speak to the question of where tropical forest preservation fits in Africa's agenda at this year's COP?
Yeah, maybe just to, thank you, Lisa. Just to highlight on something. I talked of the messaging for the African continent, and one of the issues that's being highlighted there is one of our very important basins, the Congo, which has the natural forests within the area. And we are looking at it, or Africa is looking at it as something that needs to, or a treasure that needs to be supported, yeah, so that we recognize it, we protect it, and plays a role, especially in terms of carbon sequestration. So I think there's some little similarity there. And then also just to weigh in on the what you had asked before on gender, especially women and work, they might be no, I mean, we can't say that there is completely no legal provisions that actually has gender lenses. There are legal provisions that have gender lenses within the country, like in Kenya. And that's why we have like even commissions that deals with gender, try and mainstream this. The only thing is that some of them are within the occupational setting. And I think this, then translating that to the SMEs, the smallholder enterprises and farmers, sometimes there's a gap there. But there's a general goodwill in terms of the legal provisions that are put in place. And even if you look at the Constitution of Kenya by itself, has that lens. So I think we might not really compare favorably with LATAM. We need to do much more, but we have somewhere to start from. That's what I would say. Thank you very much, Elisa.
Wonderful. Thanks so much. We're getting close to running out of time here. We have only a few more minutes. So I'm going to turn to one more question. I think we have a couple of other questions backing up, and we'll probably respond to those after the fact and offline. But I think this next question is really interesting because it gets to the heart of the dilemma, I think, that many African states are facing. And here's the question. Given Africa's reliance on oil and gas revenues, what specific financing mechanisms are being proposed at COP to ensure a just transition that doesn't constrain upstream investment capacity? This is such a complicated question. How do we simultaneously invest in development, economic development across the African continent, and also pursue this just transition? How can we think about that in the context of the COP? Which panelists want to take a crack at that tricky question?
That's a big question, and I don't know if I'm not trying to give a comprehensive answer. We saw this play out, as I said, from Nigeria, when there were the negotiations for the plastics treaty. So, the plastics treaty really didn't get off the ground because, the 3,000 or more products that come downstream out of the oil and fossil industry, plastic is one of them. Plastic is a very lucrative industry that comes off the back of the oil industry. So right from the beginning, there's a very strong lobby not even wanting to talk about plastic reduction and the damage that does to our environment, because the lack of alternatives for packaging, for all kinds of things that we use plastics for, are not immediately apparent. So the challenge became so huge. So when we talk about the just transition, we talk about many elements of it. But for me, and I think Collins will talk about it in the broader terms, but where it sort of hit home to me as to the scale of the overwhelming challenge was the failure of the plastics treaty, because it links to the fact that industry cannot give it up. And for countries in the Middle East that have built their entire economies on oil, asking them to look at this treaty was actually going to hit their bottom line in a huge way. So you saw how they came out very boldly, full force. Really, we haven't even really started the negotiation. We'll see how it goes in UNEA in December, because we do need to reduce plastics. It's costing all of us in our health and our environment. And there will be no just transition until we look at how we phase out plastic. Thank you.
Thank you so much. And unfortunately, we are out of time. I feel like this panel could have gone on for another hour. We have more questions, we have more answers, we have really a vibrant discussion. So I want to begin by thanking all of the panelists for your engagement and your expertise. I took pages and pages of notes here just listening to you speak. And I have come away from this panel with, I think, sort of 3 high-level themes that I'm going to take away with me today, and maybe our audience will expand on those. The first is the importance of finance. I guess that's no surprise, but I think every single panelist mentioned it in some way, and a lot of that attention is on sort of the loss and damage and non-economic components of finance and how we can think about getting those dimensions covered, and which financial mechanisms might be appropriate for Africa at this time. The second theme that I heard again, and every panelist talked about this too in some different ways, was maybe some tension between the leadership that we're seeing by heads of state and by leaders of global organizations and the very realities that people are experiencing in local communities and on the ground. And how can that gap be better bridged? through the COP process. And then the third piece that I really always find fascinating is this mindset question. I just think that is so critical. It affects all of us. It touches all of us. How can we think about the role of mindset, some changes in mindset or opportunities of mindset to reframe the challenges that we're facing and potentially achieve better outcomes as a result? So those are all open questions and unresolved issues. I'm very grateful for the insights and comments from all of our panelists. And we will respond, I think, by email, if I'm not mistaken, from the Global Center on any of the remaining questions that we weren't able to get to. So thanks to our audience for your participation as well. And I hope we have a very successful COP.
Thank you. Thank you, everybody. It's been a pleasure. Take care.
Thank you. Thank you all.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Thank you and bye.
Thank you.